So Pixar's Onward is it's, what can I say? It's another great example of like how Pixar does great world building, while at the same time providing another emotionally moving story that can resonate well enough for adults as it can for kids. So the story with Onward is that they set it up as like, there was a world that used to be magic. It was a world of magic and dragons and elves and trolls and all sorts of magical beasts and quests, um, and all that's kind of still there except for the magic, because then industrialization comes in and basically has modernized everything. So no one has use for magic any now because they've developed technology. So magic has kind of become an outdated format of essentially essentially technology. And I kind of like that aspect because like a lot of fantasy films say like there used to be magic, and then like the Dark Lord or something came across the land and removed all magic. Nothing really removed magic here. At least that's what it seems like. It seems like industrialization was the the enemy of magic here. Of course, the film doesn't question that too much. It doesn't want to get that deep, although there are little bits and pieces that do kind of question it. But at any rate, it's the modern world. There are suburbs now. Everyone has cars and elves and trolls and fairies and dragons and all sorts of creatures all mingled together, except for unicorns. Apparently, unicorns are apparently like kind of like deer, I guess. They get into your trash and everything. So we essentially follow two brothers. We have Ian Lightfoot, played by Tom Holland, who's essentially a nervous 16-year-old who, he's so nervous he can barely get through his driver's test. He's not sure if he's ready to, go out into the world. And he's just fearful of just everything. So kind of a meek guy. And on the other side of the spectrum is his older brother, Barley, voiced by Chris Pratt, who is the complete opposite. He's eccentric. He's boisterous. As opposed to being a beanstalk, he's kind of more beef and rugged. And I kind of like how his character is established as he plays Dungeons and Dragons, but he plays them, in like a manner where he really embraces it as kind of like kind of like a punk rock thing, which is kind of funny because they do set it up like, yeah, he plays Dungeons and Dragons, he plays a fantasy game, but because it's part of history, it's kind of historical fantasy. So like, I kind of like that aspect to his character. Of course, Tom Holland gives that perfect performance of, the person who's not quite sure of himself. And Pratt, of course, gives that, that over-the-top heroic delivery. So eager to go on quests and stuff like that. Now, they have a little bit of an odd situation at home. They live with their single mother, Laurel, who's played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And she is a widower. Her husband had passed away when the boys were very young. Ian has like no memory of their dad, and Barley only has like a few memories of him, so they didn't really connect with him much, and that loss kind of weighs on the household. Laurel has kind of tried to move on and tried to have a new husband. She has a new boyfriend who happens to be a cop who the boys kind of really don't like. They don't establish him as like a villain they gotta conquer, just someone who kind of grates on their nerves because they feel like they haven't quite had the closure they wanted with their dad. But then magic comes into play once more when they discover that their dad had left them behind a magical staff and a crystal that can bring their dad back to life for a day, for one day only. And it kind of works, but they only have about half their dad, like the lower half. So they can't really like talk to him or say that much to him past, contact with feet. So that starts off this road quest to go find a new crystal, to complete the magic and finally get the closure they want with their dad. So it starts off, it has that, that buddy road trip format. And because it takes place in this sort of like, contemporary fantasy environment, I expected like, okay, worst case scenario, I thought the film was just going to be just nothing but wall to wall, just like fantasy gags. Just look at like the funny stuff that we have these fantasy creatures doing the whole time. And thankfully, there's not a lot of that. It maintains quite. I mean, they make sure that it's just mostly just background stuff and that they're funny gags, but that they're just part of the world. Like they've actually kind of like thought about, a whole lot of aspects of how this world, has kind of restructured with the advent of, roads and electricity and different types of technology and smartphones and all that. So it's kind of accounted for most of it here. There are like a few sequences I kind of expected, which did kind of like it kind of took me out of the picture a little bit. Like for instance, there's a car chase they have with a bunch of fairies that, because the fairies, because the world has kind of modernized them, they don't use their wings anymore. They use motorcycles. So there's a little bit of a slapsticky chase there, which I kind of expected. Not bad. It just kind of like, I kind of expected it. What I love about the film, though, is that it doesn't shy away from the bigger story here about, two brothers trying to come to terms with the loss of their father. And it gets very emotionally heart-tugging at times. Like if you're a parent and you're going into this film and you think you're gonna be crying the same way you were at like Up and Toy Story 3 and Inside Out, you will probably be crying by the end of this too. And especially because like there are certain times in the film where it kind of catches you off guard. Namely, there's one sequence that I did not expect them to have in this type of film. There's a sequence where during a little bit of a lull in their adventure to try to find this crystal, Ian asks Barley about all the memories that he has of Dad. And Barley says he has one memory that he really doesn't like about his father, which is that he couldn't bear to see him in his hospital bed dying with all those tubes hooked up to him. So like, he had like, that opportunity to say goodbye, but couldn't bring himself to do that because he didn't want to remember his father that way. And that is like, it's such like a tough emotion that just that feels relatable. It's just like, if a family member's dying, you want to remember them at their best, that you have to say goodbye, but you can't bring yourself to say goodbye in that way. So it kind of, I was like, wow, I've never seen an animated film do this. Like usually when we have animated films where the parents are killed off, it's usually just an excuse, to get them out of the way so that the kids can go on their own adventure. Here, I actually kind of like that the film is trying to embrace the fact that that these two brothers have to revive their father and to get closure with their dad because his death did affect them like deeply. Like it's not just like, a little bit of a driving force. It's the entire driving force for why they're going on this mission. The other thing I had to mention too is like there's a great B plot here between Laurel. Their mom basically is going out looking for their sons, realizing like they've gone off on their own. I gotta save them, and she ends up connecting with Corey, a manticore played by Octavia Spencer, and they're both like fairly big gals who feel like they want to burst out and they want to do something. Like Laurel does a lot more exercises at home. Corey used to be this powerful manticore warrior, this kind of mix of like a griffin and like a scorpion. Like she used to be like a brutal warrior, and now she's kind of like a little bit more of an aged and weary kind of a fast food chain manager. So she wants to break out of her role. So they have their own kind of like fun little B plot there. So I don't want to reveal too much about what they do, but I'll say this. If you ever wanted to see a film where a mom in a sweater wields a magical sword to defeat a dragon, this is your film. that's in the film. Yeah, the way that this film builds up to it and doesn't just focus on like the slapstick and the craziness and the chase of it all, and actually takes a few more moments out of its way to actually address what like the dad of Ian and Barley meant to them, and also like change their plan for what will happen once Dad is back. It kind of shifts over the course of their adventure when they realize how much their father meant to them in different ways, and how much of their dad rubs off on them that they can take to themselves. Like that's the big thing with Ian, is that he feels like he's not quite there. Like he's not quite the man that his dad was, and he wants to elevate himself. And he feels like maybe if he can connect with his dad, that he can get to that level. If he kind of, does like that checklist of saying like, basically like a second bucket list, saying like, if Dad comes back, I want to do this, this, and this, and this will help me, be the person, that I wish I was if I still had my dad. And that kind of changes over the course of the film. So it's not just a matter of just, going to get the crystal. They will find that crystal, but it's not like the central part. There's no like villain holding it back, saying like, like, haha, you will never see your father, or some like dark secret about their father or something like that. No, it actually remains fairly on point here. And a very, very, very heartfelt story for, just two brothers trying to connect and basically deal with the loss of their dad, which you don't really see that too much in a lot of animated films. It was directed by Dan Scanlon, who previously did Monsters University. And that kind of makes sense, because like Monsters University had great world building, but didn't lose sight of the buddy dynamic and kind of like the emotional drive that fueled the characters, but also changed over the course of the picture here. Onward is very much on the same level, except because it has that that family element to it. It makes it a lot more sincere, and it hits home a lot harder. So yeah, it kind of caught me off guard here. Well, I mean, it kind of caught me off guard in like certain scenes I did not expect to see out of this type of adventure here. But I guess at this point I kind of should, because Pixar films, they tend to they tend to kind of like treat their audience as adults without being very adult-ish. Like they can talk about themes of of death and loss and and coming of age stuff. Nothing feels out of balance for Pixar at this point. They could pretty much talk about any topic when they just find some fun and crazy way to stage it through great animation here. And just like the whole urban fantasy setting, just all the little details here and there, the funny little gags and relatable stuff, just the detail within this animation. I love how Barley's van is called Guinevere, and it's basically like a rundown van. It's got a unicorn painted on the side. It's got a bizarre interior. There's duct tape all over the place. Like the dashboard's falling apart, the bumper's falling off. Just lots of lovely little details like that make this world feel lived in and relatable while still having that cool fantasy element that really makes it stick out. So yeah, I also got to mention the one more thing too, is that by the end of the film, they are literally fighting, like, it seems like, I mentioned the whole, like, industrialization might be a villain here. They literally fight a building by the end of this film. So it seems might be a little bit more apparent, little bit more of like a subtle messaging in there. But the more overt message of the picture about finding closure within your family and dealing with loss, I feel comes across so well. And just like a damn good script. It's perfectly paced, I think. Like I said, there are a few slapsticky sequences which kind of feel expected here and there. But like I said, it's mostly it feels like they don't go off the rails here with the fantasy element stuff, and basically an urban fantasy setting pretty much. They never go too far off the rails with it. They always maintain focus on these characters, and we get to know them, we get to like them, and we get to feel for them when they're so desperate to just come to terms with themselves. So yeah, what can I say? It's another great film from Pixar. So, for Onward, 4 out of 5 stars.